Good morning. We're going to talk about Chapter 7, Paragraph 7 this morning. Just kind of give you an overview. Chapter 7 or Paragraph 7 covers once you have your buyer and seller under contract, it lines out the duties and responsibilities of the buyer and seller in regard to the condition of the property and how we determine the condition of the property. The first paragraph there, 7A, it lines out that of course the buyer is going to have access to the property to have inspections done, property inspections, termite inspections, and those kind of things. It lets everybody know that the seller is responsible for leaving the utilities on, having the utilities on, so the buyer can have the inspections done and have them done accurately. Water, gas, electricity, all those things have to be on for the buyer's inspection. 7B talks about seller disclosure, what the rules are on the seller disclosure. The seller disclosure, we haven't really talked too much about that. The seller of any real property in Texas has to provide a seller disclosure. Now, not just properties that are on the market with real estate firms, it's everybody, for sale by owners, investors. There are, however, 11 pre-printed exemptions where the buyer or the seller does not have to provide those. I'm going to get my book and turn to that page. The exemptions or the exceptions are on page 114 in your book, and there's two sets of them. There's the kind of the layman's terms or the summary, that's the first group, and then the actual statutory exemptions or on middle of page 114. But I'm going to say in most of your real estate transactions, you're going to have a seller disclosure. The buyer needs to have that seller disclosure either before they make the offer or at the time they're signing the offer, because you've got to realize the seller is making a representation to the buyer in regard to condition. What does the seller know about the property that could affect the buyer's decision-making process and even wanting to buy the property? The seller disclosure might bring up an issue where maybe the house had previously caught on fire, or it had a foundation problem or something like that, something that would preclude the buyer from even wanting to buy it. So the seller disclosure takes a lot of responsibility off of the realtors involved, because it's the seller making the representation in regard to the condition of the property, and where the realtors basically are not getting into that. We're not going to render any kind of an opinion in regard to what kind of condition we think the property's in. Oh, it's in great shape. Those are all dangerous words, dangerous verbiage that sometimes we get caught up in, and seemingly the property does look like it's in good condition, but we're not trained experts to render those kind of decisions to your buyer, to our buyer. So there's another choice in 7B2 where the seller has to provide the disclosure, or the seller can provide the disclosure within so many days of the effective date. There are going to be situations where you will have to put a number of days in there, and the lower you keep that, the better. Like maybe within 1 day, the seller will get the seller disclosure. maybe within 2 days. If it's a Sunday, your buyer wants to make an offer, the seller disclosure and the other documents have not been posted in our multiple listing service where we can gain access to those. You might want to put within 1 day after the effective date, or within 2 days after the effective date. But preferentially, it's much, much better to have the seller disclosure signed, initialed by the buyer prior to the buyer making the offer, or at the time the buyer makes the offer. The next item down there is the seller disclosure notice of lead-based paint. The lead-based paint addendum is in your book. If you'll look in the index, you just run down to all the addendums, and you'll find it in there. The lead-based paint addendum is a EPA form, federal government form, where the seller has to disclose any knowledge of lead-based paint. This is only for properties that were built before 1978. So any house that's older than 1978, you have to have a lead-based paint addendum. The lead-based paint addendum has to be completely, accurately completed, where the seller makes their representation in regard to the lead-based paint. The buyer has to make a decision on whether they want to have further inspections done to determine whether the property has lead-based paint. And also, the buyer has to be provided a pamphlet, and whoever you go to work for will have these in their stockroom, but it's called Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home. If you have a Spanish-speaking customer, that there are the Spanish-speaking forms in your stockroom also. If you give them one in Spanish, you also have to give them one in English. So be sure you stay in compliance with all these lead-based paint rules. The lead-based paint addendum has to be signed and dated by both real estate firms involved, your buyer and your seller. So the fines for not being in compliance for this are stiff. There was an issue here in Abilene a few years ago where a broker was audited. Their files were audited by EPA investigators, and his fine for not being in compliance was in the thousands of dollars. So anyway, just FYI there. Under 7D, the buyer has a couple of choices on how they're going to accept the property. This is where your contract that you have in your exercise that you open up in a PDF and you can print it. This is where it's going to differ a little bit from your book, because this contract was revised and went into effect June the 1st. So we're looking at a brand new contract form. In the book, the author of the book is supposed to be getting me some inserts that I can post and that will match these contracts. But the book publishers have a difficult time keeping up with the contracts. Essentially, they're all pretty much the same. There are just little nuances that get changed every couple of years as our state legislature meets and the broker lawyer committee. But y'all can kind of read through there, 7D1 and 2. Neither one of those, you're going to have to check one, okay? Pretty much check 7D1, but by checking that does not preclude the buyer from having an option period and having inspections done. What this means is the buyer simply, on their first glance at the property, did not see anything that stood out from them that they wanted the seller to do as part of their initial negotiations. Okay? Under lender required repairs, neither party is obligated to pay for lender required repairs, and lender required repairs are appraisal repairs. Whatever the appraiser comes up with that they see that needs to be done. The completion of the repairs and treatments. Again, this has changed a little bit from your book. Not a lot, but a little bit. The repairs have to be done by licensed contractors that normally do those kinds of repairs. So if a customer or if a seller has say a breaker box that needs to be replaced, that has to be done by a licensed electrician. You can't get your handyman. The listing agent cannot send their handyman out there to replace breaker boxes or replace a water heater. Anything that would typically require some kind of a permit has to be done by licensed contractors. And that only takes the monkey off the realtor's back. You know, those kind of trades, like plumbers, electricians, heating and air, licensed heating and air people, they're insured, they're bonded, they're experts in those fields, and the real estate agents are always trying to kind of stay ahead in terms of liability. We do not want to be liable for calling some maintenance guy out to do a repair that required a permit, and they messed up on the repair, and then who's responsible for taking care of those items, you know? So always just be aware of that, and make sure those kind of things happen. We don't get into too much on letter G with residential contracts. That's more in the farm and ranch type contracts and commercial. H, residential service contracts are, I'm on page 5 of 9 of the contract. I'm still in chapter 7. But letter H basically talks about what are called residential service contracts. And the easiest comparison to let you know kind of what that is similar to an extended warranty that you might buy on a used car. Residential service contracts are not insurance policies. They're not licensed by the Texas Department of Insurance. They're licensed by the Texas Real Estate Commission. To do business in Texas, there's about 7 or 8 of them here in Texas that are licensed to do business here. They're anywhere from $375 cost-wise to $675, depending on the type coverage that a customer might want. You can probably, if you wanted to know a little bit more about those, you could Google Old Republic residential service contracts. We use that one quite a bit. We have a rep that comes in our office once a week or so with Old Republic, and they're a good company. They pay their claims good, but basically the residential service contracts, they help kind of shield an owner against major repairs that the homeowner's insurance will not pay for. So, you know, if the heating and air goes out in the middle of July, they're going to call that home warranty company, and the home warranty company they're going to fix it and they're going to patch it. They're not, you know, just because it quits working, they're not going to put everything new in. You know, they're going to just keep patching it and working on it, and at least they will get it operational. That's about all on chapter 7, paragraph 7. I'll be posting one on. Be combining chapter 8, which is very short, and we'll go into chapter 8 and chapter 9 on the next video.